Sam Williams and Markquese could be potential trade candidates for the Dallas Cowboys during the 2024 season. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are answering your Twitter questions today, including which practice squad player are we the most excited to see during training camp? Should the Cowboys sign CeeDee Lamb now over Micah Parsons and Dak Prescott? But let's start with this first question from Rocky. He wants to know, Landon, who are the best trade candidates if the Cowboys need to accumulate some more draft capital? Like he actually suggested Markquese, but any names come to mind for you?
Well, I think there's, kind of several categories of these guys, right? Like there's guys that I would consider to be trade candidates, just in a vacuum, like as we stand right now, guys that you could potentially trade away to get assets that maybe are surplus guys, like guys that you have extra depth on the roster that you could turn that into an asset as a trade pick, right?
And that's probably Markquese, and that's probably why right. Rocky suggested it.
Yeah. Now there's another category of guy, right? Of guy that, like, let's say you get into the season a little bit, it's not going the way you want. The Cowboys truly decide like it's time to kind of do a rebuild of some sort, and you're trying to gain capital for the future. And that's when you start, kind of reaching into, the areas in which players that you would never normally consider trading, right? Guys that are glue guys that have value, that are either on cheap contracts for the production that they're giving you, or are older guys that maybe have an expensive contract that you value, but in the viewing through this new pair of glasses in which you're like looking at, trying to get assets, trying to rebuild the team, maybe you think, okay, it's time to kind of move on from this player in order to kind of get assets in return for them. What we would describe as selling high on these players, right? I think, one of the names, like you've got a couple names that you're going to mention here. Let's start with one of your names first. Give me one of your names.
I think Sam Williams is one of the names that could be traded regardless. Now,
yeah,
you and I
both first category, right?
Like
not necessarily. Yeah,
he is somebody that is. We're still trying to figure out if he's going to fit Mike Zimmer's defense. Remember, Mike Zimmer's defense is a lot more about discipline, being in the right spots, knowing your assignment. And for as talented as Sam Williams is, and for how explosive he is, that's not really his skill set. Not yet, at least. We're going into year 3. Maybe things will change. So I could just see us getting into camp and we find out pretty quickly, like, Sam is a really talented player that just doesn't fit this scheme. And maybe they move on for a 6th-round pick or whatever it is. And obviously that doesn't sound like a lot, but I think that's one that would make sense. Go ahead. You comment on
I was just gonna say discipline. That's the thing with Sam Williams, and not like off field kind of. Well, there's some of that too, but mostly just like on field discipline, which is something that Zimmer puts a huge priority on, and that's really the main concern with Sam on the field is the offside penalties, the dumb penalties, which all kind of leads to just a lack of assignment understanding, which is something that he's going to need to have if he's going to play in the Zimmer defense.
The other one that's really intriguing, let's say Sam Williams does work out, right? And it's just clear that he's taken a step forward. You drafted Marshawn Nealon in the 2nd round this year. Obviously, you still have Micah Parsons, so you want to get under a long-term deal. What if we get to midway through the season and it's just clear that the Cowboys are like a 500 team and it's not a team that's going to contend? I could see DeMarcus Lawrence being an intriguing trade candidate for a contender. Let's say the Baltimore Ravens, who the Cowboys played early in the year, they need some more edge rush help. Lawrence, I think, is $10 million, so he'd be even cheaper in season. Would a team that's contending give up let's say a 3rd round pick, maybe even a little bit more for DeMarcus Lawrence for half a season in a Super Bowl window? I think so. We've seen other edge rushers that are not as good as DeMarcus Lawrence get traded for less or get traded for more in season. I'm not advocating that the Cowboys should trade Tank at all. One of my favorite players, but if it's just clear that they're not trending in the right direction and that Lawrence isn't part of their long-term future, I can see how that would make some sense.
Yeah, and I think, that does make some sense. And I think the area in which you look towards the end of the season where you're going to get the most value is, 2 specific spots, especially on defense, right? Pass rushers, you can just never have enough of them, especially a pass rusher who can play the run the way that DeMarcus Lawrence does. I mean, that's really going to be valuable at the end of the season. And then the other position that you really, never can have enough, but especially by the end of the season, is cornerback. And I would throw in, the Cowboys have signed Diggs to this long-term contract. They have a couple of young corners that they like on this roster already. If things start going south a little bit and this team decides to rebuild a little bit, what do you think that they could get for DaRon Bland? Because you want to talk about selling high. I don't know that, DaRon Bland was a really good player last year, obviously broke the record for interception touchdowns, but is his stock ever going to be as high as it is currently? And you're already, like I said, committed to a big money contract at the other cornerback position. You're going to have to pay DaRon Bland a lot of money simply because of that one season. Now, how would you feel if he came out this year and he didn't have nearly as many interceptions, and he kind of was having a similar success rate to what we were seeing near the end of the year, which was kind of hit and miss, right? I think, having to sign him to a long-term contract for a big money contract, that may not be something that is as appetizing. And if you can get could you get a 2nd round pick for DaRon Bland?
Let me throw out this scenario. Let's say Bland is playing as well as he did last year, or maybe even a little bit less. Maybe he's not breaking.
Breaking the all-time record for pick sixes. Yeah.
Let's say he's playing really, really well, and X team offers you a 1st round pick. Does it matter? Does it matter how well he's playing at that point if somebody's willing to give you a 1st round pick for Bland?
I think it depends on where the Cowboys are at that point, because
that's probably the answer, right? Like, let's say again, I'm going to use the example. Let's say they are 4-5 midway through the season.
Then I would say, let's trade Bland, because I think it just, look, you're already kind of set up into a situation that's not great. Like at 4-5, you could turn it around for sure and definitely make the playoffs, but it obviously is not portending well. And there's probably a reason that you've made it to 4-5. So at that point, I think it might be worth the trade at this point.
And the reason why he might be worth a 1st round pick or maybe a high 2nd or 2nd and change is because he's cheap right now, right? He's on a
exactly
5th round draft pick, and he still has another year left on his deal.
Right.
So a team could be looking at DaRon Bland like that's really cash strapped and be like, hey, we can get an all-pro caliber corner for the next year and a half, and we're paying him nothing. I think teams that are in Super Bowl windows, not the Jets because the Jets have cornerbacks, but teams like that, right? Like maybe the Texans. Let's give the Texans. Texans are in a Super Bowl window with CJ Stroud right now. If it's just clear like they need another cornerback, why not? I'm going to give you one more name that I think could be mentioned, but I don't think would be traded, and that's Osa Odigizua, who is in the last year of his deal. Now, the reason you could get a lot for him is because he's young and he's a defensive tackle that rushes the passer. There's not a lot of those out there. However, I think you're better off just keeping him and letting him hit free agency because you're likely to recoup a pretty high compensatory pick there. So it probably doesn't make sense to trade him unless you're getting blown away by an offer. And I just don't see that happening for a defensive tackle going into the final year of his deal.
One more real quick along the lines of the depth ones, right? What about Malik Hooker? Like, let's say you get into the safety class and suddenly you see, Wanye Thomas can still really play. We have all this depth here that we keep talking about. Hooker's a name who I think could garner you a quality pick for what he is. And now suddenly you can have an opportunity to kind of play some of your younger guys and develop that talent as well. Save just a little bit of money, not a ton, But if you wanted to get like I don't know, 5th or 6th round, 4th, 5th round, 6th round pick for some,
a day 3 pick.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really the fact that you're shedding some money, you're picking up a pick, and you're opening up a starting
That's right.
spot. That's the value in trading somebody like Malik Hooker. Let's get to some more Twitter questions, including my favorite practice squad player to watch, who is going to be on the offensive line this year, who I still think can make the 53-man roster. We will get to Earl Bostic next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets. I absolutely love Gametime. It's what I use to buy all of my tickets. And now you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, our next question here comes from Aaron. He wants to know, who is the one practice squad player that you are most excited to watch when training camp starts?
Ooh, that's a good question. We kind of talk about some of the players that are right above the practice squad level as, the guys to kind of watch a little bit. But the practice squad guys are obviously, there's a reason that they hung around. There's a reason they're on the practice squad, and it's not just because they're good at practicing. So I tend to think that there's 2 or 3 guys that I kind of have my eye on just to kind of see where they are. I know you're going to mention one of them already because you've mentioned him. But I think that the first guy I wanted to kind of start with, and I've spoken about him a little bit already, is Tyrus Wheat. I just think he's an interesting player who obviously the Cowboys had a lot of interest in last year during the undrafted free agent period. He was very highly kind of there was a bidding war basically at him, after the draft. Very well thought of by a couple different teams. In fact, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he almost got signed off of the practice squad during the regular season at a certain point. Yep. So it's just a guy that was kind of an odd fit in last year's defense, right? Just didn't seem to have kind of a set position. He was sort of a linebacker, sort of a defensive end, kind of, in between. But now I think in the Zimmer defense, he makes a lot of sense, especially as a Sam linebacker, pass rusher, almost kind of a guy that could be the opposite piece of wherever you're moving Micah Parsons, right? Because he could play the same positions that Micah does, obviously not at the same level, but I mean, as a guy you plug into Sam while Micah's playing defensive end, or you plug into defensive end while Micah's playing Sam. So I think, he's a guy that, I'm interested to see what his body looks like after a year, an off season in the weight room. And just to kind of see, not just like, did he get bigger and stronger, but like, what does he look like? I mean, he's such an unusual body type that I think seeing where his body has developed will kind of give us an indication of maybe where they end up playing him. I do think that, he could make the team and be, one of your key down roster special teams players who's like a, do all Swiss Army knife substitute if someone gets injured. Right. So he's definitely one of the guys I'm watching. Who are you watching?
I really like Tyrus Wheat. I think this is a good call by you for a couple different reasons. He played last year. He was on the practice squad. He was on the regular roster.
Yep.
They clearly like him for some reason. And I actually think he might fit Mike Zimmer's defense a little better. For a team that likes to use Sam linebackers, he might fit really, really well. My guy, though, is Earl Bostic, who the Cowboys
Mhm.
gave $250,000 guaranteed last year as an undrafted free agent. They signed him with the idea, Landon, that this is a developmental offensive lineman who is a good athlete who just needed some time, spent the entire year on the practice squad. The reason why you give somebody this much money is because you believe eventually he can make your
Yeah.
53-man roster. I want to see, what does he look like from year 1 to year 2? Is it any better? Is it just a little bit better? If it's only a little bit better, he might not make the team. If it's significantly better, maybe you're talking about a situation where he beats, Chuma Udoga, and now you're not carrying Udoga, and it's Earl Bostic that's one of your swing tackles, or maybe he's the last offensive lineman on your team. He's probably the one that I'm going to be the most excited to see during training camp and the preseason.
And he's another guy that, like, again, this may be kind of small potatoes, but every little edge matters. He's another guy that, when you talk about what Bones was looking for in this new type of blocker with the kickoff rule changes, he's one of those guys that could fit that body type. He could be out
Oh,
on the
yeah.
field. He's athletic. He's not like a lumbering offensive lineman. He's an athletic guy he wears that weight well. So you feel like he could be a valuable piece on special teams if you were able to kind of find a way to manage to get him to dress for a game. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If he really has improved, if he looks athletic out there, and if he looks close enough to Chuma Udoga, then there might be a possibility that they try to find a way to have both of them on the team, and then with the idea that eventually they let Udoga go as the kind of Rubicon of where Earl's talent passes Chuma. So
Yep.
I think it's an interesting name for sure, and clearly, like you said, you have to follow the money with some of these guys, right? There's clearly a reason they gave him all that money, and they're not just going to throw it away. So they're going to give him an opportunity to kind of come in here and earn a spot, and it'll be interesting to see if he can do it. I've got one more. If we have time.
Yeah. I just want to mention one more thing on Boston before we move on.
Go ahead. Yeah,
this was
please.
somebody who was a 94th percentile athlete, according to Raz last year. 6'6", 310 pounds, and he had a 1.68 10-yard split, which is just insane. If you guys remember during the draft process, I love that Jordan Morgan had like a 1.69 10-yard split, a 1.68. Like, this guy can fly off the ball. So just, again, supreme athlete who the Cowboys gave a lot of money to. I just want to see what he looks like in year 2. But please give us another.
So there's lots of these guys to kind of go over, but I think this is a guy that was on the practice squad at different points, was on the regular season team at certain points, and has just kind of been forgotten in the wash of all the conversation in this position. But Malik Davis really did show you some good running last year.
I'm glad that you brought him up. Yes.
And I think that, listen, I was during last year's conversations about Malik Davis versus Rico Dowdle, I was very strongly Rico Dowdle. And I think that played itself out correctly, right? He's probably going to be the starter, or at least the second closest thing to a starter. I would imagine he actually is the starter, and everyone else is rotating around him. That doesn't mean that I don't like Malik Davis and that I didn't like what Malik Davis. In fact, I was really impressed with what Malik was able to do. That's the second year, and kind of getting in there and competing and getting opportunities and earning more opportunities. And I think I was impressed what he did, what he got a chance in the regular season too. So, obviously the room has gotten a lot more crowded. You add in Zeke, obviously Rico is going to get his. Deuce Vaughn is going to get every opportunity because he was a draft pick. They signed Royce Freeman, who I think may surprise some folks with how much he may be involved in this situation. So, and then on top of that, they signed a drafted free agent in Nathaniel Pete that I think we're kind of hoping will be sort of the juice. So all of this is to say is that Malik Davis is on this team, but has been basically forgotten as they sort of built around him, but they shouldn't, because obviously whenever he got the opportunity on the field, he showed you something. It's just that he wasn't quite as explosive as Rico Dowdle. So I'm hoping that Malik Davis takes another step. And maybe forces his way onto this roster at the expense of maybe an expensive veteran who's coming back for a second round and didn't maybe isn't quite as explosive as he was when he left. I don't know.
I love the Malik Davis call. I thought he looked awesome against Green Bay. Was it in 2022? And then we just really didn't get to see him too much over the rest of that season. So it sounds like, I know Mike McCarthy talked about today how Malik has had a great offseason. I'm really curious to see what he looks like during camp and obviously in the preseason this year. All right, let's get to one more question, including which big money contract should the Cowboys try to get done right now? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers, on tomorrow's show, we're going to break down some OTA nuggets, some Mike McCarthy sayings. He pulled a Darren Hambrick on us, which we have to talk about tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to do that. So make sure you check out that show. But let's finish up here with a question from Thomas, who wants to know, would it benefit the Cowboys to sign CeeDee Lamb right now before Dak Prescott or Micah Parsons?
I think that there's a misconception that's kind of going around, and I think it probably started with the ESPN, not too surprising, that there needs to be a sequencing of these that has to go a certain way, which I really don't think there does. And let me be clear. I think there may be some tie in the sequencing of the wide receiver contracts to each other, like we've talked about, right? Like the fact that Jefferson, Lamb, and Ayuk all share an agency, right?
Higgins. The good thing is it sounds like we're getting closer. We got Devontae Smith got a deal.
That's right.
Amon-Ra St. Brown got a deal, and now Jalen Waddle got a deal this morning. So I do think we are inching closer to having this one get done.
I mean, all the deals underneath them are getting done. The Nico from what's his name?
Nico
from,
Collins
Nico Collins got signed from the Texans as well.
Yep.
So yeah, and those aren't. Those are all kind of higher end wide receiver, but they're not like in the conversation of the Ayuk, Jefferson, Lamb situation. But that does kind of lay out the groundwork to where we're going, right?
Yes.
It's the questioner's question. I don't think it matters internally whether the Cowboys sign Dak or CeeDee or Micah or whomever else. If that, there's this misconception that like you have to get Dak done in order to sign CeeDee. That's not the case at all. Look, I understand that there's kind of a general anger towards the Cowboys front office and a sense of incompetence. They're not that incompetent, like they're not so incompetent that they didn't have the kind of silos of cash that they need separated out so they don't have to be dependent on each other. I think, they have this idea of exactly where this money is going to go, and they've set it aside. And if anything, maybe that's, that flexibility that's required has been kind of feeding some of their at least thought process of why they haven't been huge in free agency, right? Is because they needed to be able to be cash flexible for these guys. So this is all a long way of saying, I think, yes, it does help to sign CeeDee Lamb right now, but only because this is the cheapest right now is the cheapest you're going to be able to sign him. And it only gets more expensive as we go. But there isn't any kind of strategic like order that has to happen in order for the Cowboys to sign all three of these guys. They can do it whatever order and it still fit it underneath the cap.
The only reason why you might prioritize CeeDee Lamb's contract right now rather than Dak or Micah Parsons is because CeeDee Lamb's kind of holding out, right? And I mean, he's playing in the 5th-year option. He's probably of the three the most likely to miss training camp and have this thing drag into not the regular season, but to drag into like late August, where you start getting a little concerned. And frankly, look at the rest of this offense. If it's not CeeDee Lamb out there, it gets kind of concerning, right? Like, who else are they going to be throwing the ball to? They just don't have the wide receiver talent at the position that they did a couple years ago. But that's the only other reason I can assume or think of as why the Cowboys would want to get this one done early. But other than that, like I have a feeling they're going to get done at least 2 of these deals before week 1. Who they are, I think one will be CeeDee. We'll see about the other, but I'm not too worried about the order.
I'm going to go ahead and plant my flag. I'm going to say that the CeeDee Lamb deal is going to be done at least by the first week of
I would think so.
Of training camp. I would think it might be done before training camp, honestly, but that's just my thought process. I'm hopeful. So we'll see.
Again, we've seen a lot of movement at the wide receiver position just in the last 2 weeks with the Jalen Waddle, the Nico Collins, the Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it does feel like that thing is speeding up.
It's thawing, right? The winter is thawing. Yeah.
For Micah Parsons, like, there's not going to be any movement. Like all the guys ahead of him, the TJ Watts, the Myles Garrett's, like those guys all recently got deals, and there's nobody below him like that's close enough to him that's going to
dictate his contract. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So that one I could see playing out for a little bit. We also have to remember,
Yeah.
Micah's on the final year of his rookie deal. The Cowboys still have the 5th-year option, and they have multiple franchise tags that they can use if we ever get to that situation. It's just not as dire, I think, as the CeeDee or the Dak extension. That's why
it's being lumped in because he's the top player on your team, or he's one of the top players on your team. But it's not like necessarily as pressing as the other two.
Exactly. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Again, every day, or check out tomorrow's show for all of the OTA news and nuggets coming out of the Dallas Cowboys practices. Again, go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.